Alright, an example. A projectile is fired straight upward. Its distance above the ground after t seconds is s of t equals negative 16t squared plus 320t. Find the velocity and speed at which the projectile hits the ground. So when the projectile hits the ground, the position will be equal to 0. Because you think of ground as position 0, 0 feet from the ground. So we set s of t equal to 0 and solve for t. So we can factor out negative 16t and t minus 20 is left over. So if you solve for t, now t equals 0 and t equals 20. So if you look at the problem, it says a projectile is fired straight upward. So at time 0 it is on the ground because it's being fired from the ground. And then at time t equals 20, this is when it hits the ground. So it would have like this shape. T equals 0 here and 20 here. And you can tell by the function it's a downward facing parabola because it has negative 16t squared. We need to find the velocity and speed when the projectile hits the ground. So we know the time is 20. Now find the velocity equation, which is the derivative of position. So use the power rule on the position function. Negative 32t plus 320. And then plug in 20 for that. V of 20. And equals negative 320 feet per second. Remember that velocity is direction and speed, so it tells you that the direction was going down because it's negative, which you already knew. If something's going up and down, it's gotta, something goes up, it has to come down at some point. And now the speed. Take the absolute value of velocity. So that's equal to absolute value of negative 320, which is positive 320 feet per second. Speed has no direction, so that's why it's always positive. It's a magnitude. Part B, find the maximum altitude achieved by the projectile. So the velocity function, set that equal to 0. So it will have zero velocity when it reaches its maximum. So you have to think the object stops at the top, or its speed is zero at the top because it's going to start going back down after that. But speed and velocity is zero right here. So that's why we set this equation equal to zero. And then you solve for t. So you can subtract 320 and divide by negative 32. And that will give us 10. Max altitude, it happens at time t equals 10. So after 10 seconds, it'll reach its maximum altitude. So we have to find what that max altitude is. And that's s of 10. Plug it into the position function. (1,600 feet). So its max altitude is 1,600 feet. You can do sign analysis to verify it's a maximum. So around 10, s prime of t is positive and negative around 10, so you know it is a max. Find the acceleration at any time t. Acceleration is the derivative of velocity. So our velocity function here, take the derivative of that, which would be just negative 32. The correct units are feet per second squared for acceleration. Or it's actually, yeah, it's feet per second squared. So it is a constant function, it doesn't have any variable. So acceleration is always negative 32 feet per second squared when you have projectiles fired in the air. And this ties into physics. And this is caused by the force of gravity. So there's always this force of gravity pushing down, and that's what the acceleration is.